So as David has said, the usual replacement for a defined benefit plan is a defined contribution plan. Now, in a defined benefit plan, all of the risk is borne by the employer. If there are any deficits, it's the employer that has to pony up for them. In a defined contribution plan, however, it's the opposite situation. The employee takes the risks. So if annuity rates or investment performance isn't in line with expectation, it's the employee's own pension that suffers. This means that when employees go from a defined benefit plan to a traditional defined contribution plan, they go from a situation where they knew what income they'd have in retirement to not necessarily knowing if they'll have enough to live on when they retire. This is a really scary transformation for employees, and it turns many of them off their new defined contribution plan. We've come up with a solution to this problem, and it's called DC Plus. And DC Plus works because it doesn't load all of the risk onto employees' backs like a conventional defined contribution plan. Today, I'm going to describe how DC Plus works. I'm going to describe the real benefit it delivers to employees. And I'm going to describe how DC Plus will integrate with the extensive infrastructure we already have in Irish Life corporate business for running defined contribution schemes. Firstly, how does it work? Well, DC Plus works because when employees come out of their defined benefit plan, they get a transfer value. And in DC Plus, employees will have the option of using that transfer value to buy a secured pension. And the secured pension is a guaranteed fixed amount of pension available to them at retirement. And it's a conventional deferred annuity provided by Irish Life. And it sits as an asset of their defined contribution plan. Now, future contributions that they make into their defined contribution plan are invested in the usual range of funds. And when employees come to retire, their total package of benefits is going to be made up of the secured pension plus whatever the proceeds of the defined contribution funds can buy. So there's still going to be some variability in the eventual outcome, in the eventual pension that members will retire on, but the range of outcomes will have been greatly narrowed because so much of their pension will be provided by the secured pension. And we think this is the difference that will allow employees to see the replacement to their defined benefit plan as a quality package and will allow them to accept it. So let's go into more detail on how it works. As I said, when employees leave a defined benefit plan, they get a transfer value, which is calculated by their scheme actuary. So in DC Plus, the scheme's consultant will have to arrange for Irish Life to quote for each member how much secured pension can be bought for each member's transfer value. And obviously it's going to vary between members. It is an annuity product, so it's going to depend firstly on bond yields, but it's also going to depend on personal factors such as the member's age, their gender, their marital status, etc. And the employees are going to need to get advice because they're going to have a choice when they join the DC Plus plan. They can use some or all of their transfer value to buy a secured pension. So they're going to need advice from their consultant, and that advice will really focus on their individual circumstances, in particular their need to have a guaranteed minimum pension from their defined contribution plan. Ultimately, though, the attractiveness of DC Plus and the secured pension will depend on premium rates. So to help you assess this, I've shown a table of sample rates for members from last month. And these are 5 members, they're all males, and they're all leaving a defined benefit plan with an accrued benefit built up of €10,000 per annum. And the middle column shows the member's transfer value that's been calculated by the scheme actuary. And that's a standard transfer value. And obviously, in each defined benefit plan, what the actual transfer value is will depend on the scheme's funding position. So it could be higher or it could be lower than that amount, but this is a good benchmark. And the third column shows the secured pension that Irish Life will provide in return for that transfer value. And obviously, there is a difference between the pension they had built up in defined benefit and the secured pension. And it's a greater difference for older members, or for younger members, but for older members, the difference is less. And the reason is that for older members, the secured pension basis is much closer to a transfer value basis. So what types or which groups of members will find the secured pension option within DC Plus attractive? Well, we think there's definitely two distinct groups that will certainly be interested in it. Firstly, members coming out of well-funded schemes or schemes where the employer is providing an enhanced transfer value. For those members, they should find it possible to replace most of their accrued pension with a secured pension. And I think if most members were offered that deal, they would take it. Older members will also find it attractive in general to purchase secured pension in their DC Plus plan. And the reason is that the secured pension annuity rates are quite close to immediate annuity rates for older members. So for those members, it will be attractive to opt for the security of locking into a fixed pension when they enter the defined contribution scheme, rather than waiting until they retire and taking a risk with annuity rates at that point. Of course, the reality is, as I've shown in the earlier slide, that the secured pension is going to be lower than the accrued pension that members are giving up. However, while the promised pension is lower, the quality of the guarantee provided over that pension is much higher than in the defined benefit plan. The reason is the secured pension is provided by an insurance company policy, and policy holders in insurance companies are protected by three different layers of protection. Firstly, the reserving basis for their policies is a very conservative basis. Secondly, insurance companies, as well as keeping those reserves for the policies, have to provide a solvency margin on top of the reserves. And lastly, insurance companies also have free assets on top of the reserves and the solvency margins. So for all of those reasons, the status of a guarantee over a secured pension is completely different from the status of a promise of a pension from a defined benefit plan. So we think that in general, members will be happy to accept a somewhat lower secured pension that's fully guaranteed in return for giving up a slightly higher but very shaky promise from a defined benefit plan. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how it will work in practice. And the first example is a man leaving a normal N60th defined benefit scheme. And he's leaving the plan because the plan is closing. And he's 55 and he's got a salary of €48,000. And he's been in the plan 30 years and he's built up an accrued pension of €15,000 per annum. And the scheme actually works out his transfer value on the standard basis as €142,000. So what happens next, as I said, is the consultant for the scheme will have to arrange Irish Life to do DC Plus quotes. And Irish Life will calculate that if he uses all of his transfer value to buy a secured pension, he can buy a maximum secured pension of €11,000. So he's joining a DC Plus plan and he faces choices. So he can use all of his transfer value to buy the secured pension, or he could invest his transfer value in the usual way in defined contribution funds that members do at the moment. Of course, he'll have an intermediate decision or option as well. He can use some of his transfer value to buy some secured pension and the balance of it to invest in a defined contribution fund. So his eventual pension will be made up of, on the left, his secured pension plus whatever his future contributions grow to, and on the right, it's just going to be made up of the usual funds accumulated from the initial transfer value plus future contributions. Before I go on to the next slide, I gave you a tantalising glimpse of there. I suppose for the actuaries in the room and for the consultants, if I asked you to guess how would the replacement package that's been provided by DC Plus compare to what the benefits left behind in the defined benefit, you'd probably say the replacement benefits would be a lot lower. After all, if the member opts to buy a secured pension, he's really going for the most conservative possible way of investing his transfer value. So you'd assume that the replacement package would be a long way short. However, if you look at the figures, this is not necessarily the case. The packages compare quite well, and this is important. So, as I said, the DB scheme closed when he was 55, and he bought a secured pension, and he continues to invest future contributions in a defined contribution fund, which grows to €123,000. Now, like all members, he maximises his tax-free lump sum and takes that out of the DC pot, and he used the balance to buy extra pension, which is €2,200. So he ends up with a total pension of €13,200. Now, if the defined benefit scheme had remained open, and we make an assumption, as we have to do to compare these, that he continued to get salary increases, say, of 2% per annum for those 10 years, he'd have ended up with a tax-free lump sum of the same $87,000, the same tax-free lump sum, and his residual pension would have been $15,600. Now, that's not too large a gap considering the conservative route that the member took. I think that would surprise a lot of the consultants in the audience. One of the reasons why the DC Plus result is looking so good is that in defined benefit plans, members actually, when they commute pension for cash, tend to get bad value for money because of commutation factors. This isn't a problem in DC Plus. Of course, DC Plus is a regular defined contribution plan, and as David alluded to earlier, defined contribution plans do have some advantages for employees over traditional defined benefit plans. And I suppose the two big advantages are the ability to take flexible income in the form of an ARF or AM or F, and also the ability to take a higher tax-free lump sum than what comes out of the traditional defined benefit plan. So just to explain, in the traditional plan, your tax-free lump sum is based on a rule which depends on service and salary. And even after a long career, you can only get 1.5 times of your salary as a tax-free lump sum. But in a defined contribution plan, members also have the choice of looking at that same calculation in a different way and taking that option if it's higher. And the different calculation is to take 25% of the total value of their fund. So obviously, if you've built up a substantial fund, for example, after a long career, a substantial fund of more than 6 times your salary, that's going to give a higher result. And that's a really positive advantage for members. So I've done another example to show how this comes true for members. And in this example, I'm looking at a defined benefit plan that's closing again. And our individual is 60, and he's got a salary of €78,000. Now, if the plan had remained open until he retired, which his normal retirement age is 65, he would have got a tax-free lump sum of €117,000 and a pension of €28,000 per annum. And this is a good plan, by the way. This is providing a spouse's pension and post-retirement pension increases. So it's a good package for this guy retiring after a career in this company. Now let's look at what would happen if the plan had closed when this individual was 60. He'd have got a transfer value on the standard basis from the plan of over €500,000. Let's say he opted to use about 3/4 of it to buy a secured pension of €25,000 per annum. And like most members buying annuities or deferred annuities, he doesn't buy post-retirement increases. So he has some transfer value left over to invest in the traditional defined contribution funds, and along with future contributions at the rate of 20% of salary per annum for the last 5 years of his career, he builds up an extra pot of €263,000. So when you capitalise the secured pension and add that 263 in, you get a total package worth of €765,000. And as I said, you can take 1/4 of that if it's higher than the traditional calculation, which it is. In this case, it's actually amounts to €191,000, which is substantially higher than what he would have got from his traditional defined benefit scheme. And in addition to that, he'll also have €71,000 left over from his defined contribution fund, which he can invest in an ARF, which will allow him to draw down capital flexibly whenever he wants. So those are two big advantages over the defined benefit plan. So if you look at, in essence, what's happened when he's changed from defined benefit to defined contribution. Okay, his pensions are roughly similar, but he has given up post-retirement increases in the defined benefit plan. But what he's got in return for that is substantially more capital available to him when he retires. And this might be really attractive to some members, particularly those with outstanding commitments when they reach retirement, for example, an outstanding mortgage. So the examples that I focused on have concentrated on benefits at normal retirement date, but obviously benefits are drawn down at other times, particularly on early retirement or on death. So just to describe how those benefits work for the secured pension element of the DC Plus package. On early retirement, we're going to calculate the value of the deferred amount and capitalise it effectively. Then we convert it to an immediate pension using current annuity rates. So what the member is getting is a fair value for the deferred, for the current value of his secured pension. Obviously, though, that early retirement pension amount isn't going to be guaranteed in advance like the normal retirement amount is, but it is a fair result for the member. What's available to the member on debt, or what's available to the trustees to pay as a debt benefit, is going to be the full value of the secured pension. Another option in the early retirement space that some members could be interested in is to actually use some of their defined contribution funds for immediate cash, but they may want to leave their secured pension intact and draw it down in the normal way when they reach normal retirement age. So we're going to facilitate that by allowing members to transfer the secured pension in toto into an AMRF. Some DC funds will obviously need to be left over in order to pay the deemed distribution which revenue require annually. So I've described how it works, I've described some of the benefits, but I just want to take a step back and look at the overall perspective. So what's really happened here when an employer opts for a DC Plus? Well, what's really happened is that the defined benefit scheme, which was a shared pot of assets, has closed, and we're now in a situation where retirement savings have been individualised. And what that means is that each member has their own pension pot to manage. Now, the infrastructure that we've built up in Irish Life corporate business over the past decade gives members all of the tools they need to manage their own pension. We have a wide range of easy tools available to allow them to plan their own retirement. And in DC Plus, the secured pension element will be an integral part of this communication effort. So what that means, for example, is that if a member logs on to their smartphone app, they'll be able to see their secured pension and their defined contribution funds side by side. It's also important in defined contribution plans to do something to deal with potential market fluctuations as members get closer to retirement. And our tool in Irish Life corporate business to deal with this is called the personal lifestyle strategy. And what the personal lifestyle strategy does is it generates a unique investment strategy for each member as they get closer to retirement that depends on the pension and the tax-free lump sum that they're targeting in retirement. Now, we're going to continue to use the personal lifestyle strategy in DC Plus, but with obviously the added feature that we're going to allow for the secured pension when we're working out how much pension and how much tax-free lump sum a member is going to take when they retire. Plan. Thank you.
Thank you indeed.
Are highly valued. And if the costs of the schemes were affordable and they were predictable, most employees and employers would be very happy to keep them going. So, from our experience, we think that many employers are ready to move on. However, many employees aren't ready to leave the valuable guarantees that they had in defined benefit behind. And that's why we've designed a solution to this problem called DC Plus. We believe that it can satisfy both camps. For employers, it does represent a full exit from defined benefit in that it does deliver cost certainty and a stable balance sheet. For employees, we think it's a fair and balanced halfway house between defined benefit and defined contribution, in that they retain valuable guarantees. But most importantly, they are now participating in a genuinely sustainable pension plan. Thank you.